Well, if you were here last Sunday, you know we were talking about salvation and heaven and what the next life might look like. And we're going to continue that conversation this Sunday because as we just heard, our gospel reading today is a continuation from last Sunday's gospel reading. As we just heard, Jesus is asked another question about heaven. Specifically, who are we going to be married to in heaven? And that's a good question that maybe some of you have thought about, particularly if you've been married more than once. So let's say, for example, there is a man who marries his high school sweetheart. They get married, they have a family together, and they're together for 20 years until she tragically dies. A few years later, the man marries a second wife. They also have children, and they're together for 40 years. And so the question is, in heaven, who's the man's wife? The first wife or the second wife? So Jesus is asked a very similar question here, and notice what his answer is. He says, nobody's married in heaven. In heaven, there's no such thing as marriage. And that may surprise you, and it may sadden some of you. Because is Jesus saying that in heaven, we're not going to be reunited with our spouse who died? Aren't we going to see our loved ones there? What is Jesus really saying here? Well, let's look at it together. Jesus is asked this question by the Sadducees, and it's important to know who the Sadducees were. The Sadducees were one of three Jewish sects in Jesus' day. There were the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. Now, the Sadducees were a very conservative religious group. They only believed in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they took those stories literally. They followed the letter of the law of Moses. The Pharisees also believed in the Torah, but they understood those stories more spiritually or symbolically, and they were also open to other sacred texts and oral interpretations. Now, that didn't make them any better in the eyes of Jesus, because if you read the Gospels, you know that Jesus mostly reserved his criticisms for the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which have led some theologians to believe that Jesus possibly belonged in that third group of Jews, the Essenes, the children of the light. We really didn't know a lot about the Essenes because they're not mentioned in the Bible. We began to learn more about them in the 1940s, because that's when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Egypt. And we discovered from those scrolls that the Essenes also wrote gospels like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. But the early church did not include those gospels in the Bible. In fact, they hid those gospels away, hoping that they would never be discovered. The Essenes, like Jesus, believe that we are children of light and that our light goes on. After our bodies die, we experience resurrection and new life. The Sadducees didn't believe that. And that's why their question here to Jesus, who you're going to be married to in heaven, isn't really a serious question, because they don't believe in heaven. What they're doing here is they're mocking Jesus. They're trying to make Jesus look like a fool for believing something silly like resurrection and life after death. But Jesus is such a brilliant teacher. Notice what he does. He knows that the Sadducees take the Torah literally. So he says to them, well, in the Torah, in the story of Moses in the burning bush, God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were long dead. So Jesus is saying when God tells Moses, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he doesn't say I was the God. He's saying I am. It's present tense, meaning that they're still alive. And that's why Jesus ends this gospel passage today saying, God is not God of the dead, God is God of the living, for they are all alive. And my friends, that's what our faith as Christians is all about, right? We say we're an Easter people. We're a people who believe in resurrection. And I don't know about you, but I've experienced the presence of my loved ones who have passed away. I've had experiences of them in very real ways. And I'd like to believe that when I die and I'm in heaven, that I will be reunited with them. So what then did Jesus say, for example, that we're not going to be married in heaven? Well, I think what Jesus is trying to get at is when we die, we are going to transcend human ideas. Okay? Marriage is a human construct. We're going to transcend the ego. We're going to transcend this sense of illusion and separateness. So in heaven, everyone's going to be our beloved. We're going to love strangers as much as we love our spouse. We're going to love strangers' children as much as we love our own children. Because in heaven, we're going to experience this oneness with everything. That's what I think Jesus is trying to say here. Now, if you ask me what heaven is like, I don't know. I've told you that before, and any pastor that tells you that they know, they don't know. No one knows for sure. Okay? But there are people who have died on the operating room table and have come back to life. And they have shared what their experience of heaven was. These stories have been told around the world. People in China, people in Japan, people in India, people in the United States. And they've been told by people who have been children and adults and teenagers, people who speak English, people who speak other languages. My point is that all of the people who have had these near-death experiences, they all say the same thing. They all have the same story, the same experience to tell. That they experience this light and this sense of love and bliss that is so powerful, so strong, unlike anything they've ever experienced before. And they feel a sense of oneness with everything. Now, a few years ago, I attended a talk in Grand Rapids. Margaret was there, Pam and Pete were there. We were there to hear an author whose name is Anita Moorjani. And this is the book she wrote called Dying to Be Me. Anita Moorjani had a near-death experience, and she wrote about it. And this is part of what she said. I'd like to read it for you. As my seemingly lifeless body lay there on the hospital bed, I felt no attachment to it. I didn't feel as though it were mine. It looked far too small and insignificant to have housed what I was experiencing. I felt free, liberated, and magnificent. Every pain, ache, sadness, and sorrow was gone. I felt completely unencumbered. I couldn't recall feeling this way before, not ever. What I can only describe as superb and glorious, unconditional love surrounded me, wrapping me tight as I continued to let go. It didn't feel as though I had physically gone somewhere else. It was more as though I had awakened. My soul was finally realizing its true magnificence. And in doing so, it was expanding beyond my body and this physical world. The feeling of complete, unconditional love was like anything I've ever known before. It was totally undiscriminating, as if I didn't have to do anything to deserve it, nor did I need to prove myself to earn it. I was aware of other beings around me. I didn't recognize them, but I knew they loved me very much, and they were protecting me. I realized that they too had been with me all this time, surrounding me with love even when I wasn't conscious of it. My heightened awareness and feelings of unconditional love in that expanded realm were indescribable, despite my best efforts to explain them. And then I was overwhelmed with the realization that God isn't a being. God is a state of being. And I was now in that state of being. I love that, and I believe her. God isn't a being. God is a state of being. And when our bodies die, we return to that state of being. We become one with it again. And so therefore, my friends, death is not something that we should fear. It is just part of the journey of moving from separation to oneness, from separation to wholeness, holiness. For God is God of the living. The Spirit of the living God is with us and within us. And the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Namaste. Hello, everybody. This is Sal Sapienza, and I'm so excited to share with all of you that I've written a brand new book. The book is called Childish Thinking: How the Church Keeps Us Stuck in Sunday School. Now, the title Childish Thinking comes from Christian scripture, where we hear that if we wish to grow in spiritual understanding, then we must let go of childish ways of thinking. And yet so many Christians today, even after years of Bible study and Sunday services, still have a very elementary understanding of their faith. They still understand God as some old man with a long gray beard. They think heaven is a place up in the clouds with pearly gates, that the devil is some red guy with horns and a pitchfork, and that hell is a fiery place below the earth. Those are things that we tell children. None of those descriptions appear anywhere in the Bible. And so in Childish Thinking, I try to dispel many of those misnomers, and I explore topics such as God, Jesus, heaven, hell, sin, prayer, and resurrection from the higher perspectives of ancient Christian mystics and contemporary progressive theologians. After each chapter, there are prayers for quiet contemplation and questions for personal reflection and journal writing. Come learn how you can let go of old ways of thinking and begin to see things with new eyes. Come and learn how you can finally graduate from Sunday school. The book is available now on Amazon, and you can read the entire introduction at childishthinking.faith.